me again when you went there, what your...
I was there from 86 to 90.
What were you doing when you were...
I was working as an advisor in a Japanese bank, international department. They were buying up New York and other places.
And what was the year?
86 through 90. Yeah. Yeah. And as I said, it's I used the details. The story is totally fiction. I mean, that what happens to Jane never happened to me. But you know, you have to have a character who does things that you don't do, right?
Right.
Or gets into trouble that you never want to have. in this case. But the details of life in Japan and what it was like living there as an expat.
And did you have observations when you did look?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have been to Tokyo and Kyoto, but I also met somebody who's a neurologist there, and I met at a conference, and when he went home, it's shortly after that big earthquake and tsunami happened near the university where he was, and he'd given me his email, and I thought for sure he was gone, you know. And so I emailed him, and he emailed me back, and it's so interesting what you said about how they don't question or challenge. He really believed, you know, we in the United States were hearing something totally different than what they were being told about what was happening.
Yeah.
So he went back and he stayed at the hospital, and he finally had his kids and wife move to where the in-laws live, which was,
Yeah.
In a different location. But
You mean Fukushima?
yeah.
Yeah, Fukushima.
How do you pronounce it?
Fukushima. Shima means island.
Yeah,
Fukushima.
yeah. I mean, and so we were communicating, and I think at that point I asked Wendy Gardner if they ever let students from another country come and go to the school, because, and he said he could never take his kids away. You know, they just
Yeah.
couldn't do that.
Yeah.
But just when, what you said about, I don't know the words that you used, but they don't really
Hona tatamai?
challenge.
Yeah. A friend of mine, her husband is in the Japanese foreign ministry, and even they were overwhelmed by this. Government said this, and he's a government worker, and yes, they assumed that they were safe, but they weren't. So she and their children went up the mountain to where her parents were, and he stayed in Tokyo. But it was devastating to people who knew that
And that's just the way
things weren't the way they were.
the Japanese mentality is, or
They're conditioned not to question. The other thing that was interesting to me about the Fukushima was how many safes there were. Japanese people always put everything in a safe. They don't use a safe deposit in a bank or anything. They each have their own very heavy personal safe, which is a 4-digit combination, not 3 like we have, but it's 4 plus a key. And all of these safes were around afterwards with all the personal stuff. And so you know how many families were devastated because you had all these very heavy safes with all their valuable things in there and papers and everything.
And that survived?
That survived. They were built to survive earthquakes.
Was there an effort to reunite safes?
I don't know. I don't know the detail. I mean, as soon as people got washed out to sea and the safes were too heavy, they stayed there. But it was just, you'd see all these safes and those were homes. Those were homes.
Well, this person was lucky because his phone was set back a little ways,
Mm-hmm.
otherwise, everything
Right.
around him was washed.
Right. Right. Yeah.
How long did it take you to write the book?
Well, a long time. Because I moved in the middle of it. But I started it as sort of slice of life, and then as I became more interested in police procedurals, I said, then I should make this really into a story. And just the slice of life is sort of like a diary, and who am I? So I started changing it and moving around, and then the final revisions, I moved chapters, dropped chapters, wrote new chapters. So the serious part of it, probably about 5 years.
I remember you once told me that office workers in Japan spend most of their time sitting around drinking tea and gossiping about each other.
And
Can you
cough and
comment on that?
smoking. Yeah, well, the places where I work, that's what they did. I can't speak for any other company. I mean, Toyota is notorious for beating people. I mean, not physically beating them, but, you know, keeping them on the track. There's the story of the American baseball player who, because all the teams, they don't have national leagues or American leagues like we have. They have company leagues. So Toyota has its baseball league, and the father of one of their American players died, and there was a game coming up, and he said, "I'm leaving. My father died." No, you can't. We have a game. Loyalty, obedience. I said, I'm gone. That was it. He left the team. But it's the industrial companies run on a different way than some of the white-collar office type. And places where I worked, they were very casual. I mean, they come in at what, 8, and they stay, if it's international, till 11. They sit around smoking and drinking green tea, and there's not all that much work in between all these hours. So and the saying in Japan is, you know, Japanese, the salaryman. The salaryman is who the worker is. Salaryman has many enemies, and it starts with his boss, his co-workers, you know, it goes that way.
How do they get things done?
Well, they do, to varying degrees, but, I mean, look at Japan. Today, the news was that they are officially in recession, so.
The economy really hasn't quite recovered since the 80s, has it?
No, not since the early 90s. Not since early 90s, sort of coasted along for a while, but, you know, part of it, I think, is they were restricting.
You were mentioning something about how with the economy, the infrastructure is still largely intact, socially functioning.
That's the difference with Japan. The U.S. has neglected our infrastructure, roads and bridges and other things. They kept going, so they kept generating through government debt. So they kept the road, everything in place. But on the other hand, I remember being told that I could deposit my check into my payment salary into an account, and the government is so nice, it gives you 0.25% interest. I was saying, really? Okay, so when you have that going and you have huge debt coming, it kind of makes for an odd situation, because you're putting a lot of money out, but you're not really tempting people to put the money in. So they'll do other things with it. So it leads to some fiscal problems. Yes?
I haven't read the book yet, but what does the title represent?
Bitter tea. It's her frustrations and her disillusionment. You know, she goes there to have this great international experience and to surf into an international career, and it's bitter tea.
The woman was probably different, right? I mean, 'cause I don't know, it's changed a lot. I don't know if it's very male.
When I was working at the bank, the foreign workers were treated as contract workers, not as regular employees. We had this lawyer from Chicago. He had his law degree, he had license to practice in Illinois, and he spoke Japanese. He could read and write it. They asked him to photocopy. They have no idea what to do with people. No idea.
Yeah, it sounded like you could have all kinds of talent and knowledge, but the fact that
Yes.
demeaned you, and they wouldn't want to use these assets.
No, they didn't know how to use it. But even among the Japanese, I mean, every spring they get the flowers, the young graduates, because they graduate in the spring. The flowers are the young women, and they have a college degree, and all they're there for is to make tea and to clean up the desk. They don't think of putting, you know, the females into a situation where you can actually use your brain. They're there only to learn the company way so that the young men who are recruited can find a bride who understands that they have to work long hours. That
That's with the college degree?
yeah, that's with the college degree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's spring flowers, and if they stay too long, they're Christmas cake. Okay,
Christmas cake.
Christmas cake. Yeah, you don't want
Stale old cake.
stale Christmas cake. Yeah, they have all these terms and things for it.
Did you learn Japanese?
To a degree, yes. I mean, it's a complicated language, but yeah. Yeah, my glorious moment of Japanese was when my coworker didn't know the word for sewage, and I could say it. So, we were looking at a septic system or something, I don't know. Came in handy, what can I say?
The thing that I like there is all the menus, they're all picture photographs for people who can't speak, so you point a lot.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yes?
You said it took you 4 or 5 years to write the book. What would you think were your biggest challenges in terms of character development or plot development? You know, were there stumbling blocks that you can remember that took you longer to
Dialogues.
dialogue?
I wrote financial reports. You can't go from a financial report to fiction easily. You know, the financial report has a plot. Yes, this happens. Yeah. But it doesn't have a whole lot of nuance. So I had to learn how to structure a story, how to have dialogue that sounded like people would say. And the thing with dialogue in fiction is that it really is compressed. You know, people can talk, and you can have eye movement, gestures, hand gestures, you know, tone of voice. It doesn't happen in a book. You've only got the words, so you have to dress it up in a different way, and you have to use the dialogue to move the story. You can't just have pages and pages of dialogue. You're just, oh, the weather, yeah, it was nice today, yeah, it was okay, yeah, well, what'd you do? I don't know, how about that? It just doesn't work in a book. So, yeah, I had to learn how to write fiction. That's why it took so long.
Imagine going from fiction to writing financial reports.
Well, as long as you're not numerically challenged. Anyone else? No questions?
Oh, traveling around. I remembered in the book how much trouble she had getting around, but she managed somehow,
Mm-hmm.
albeit a stranger or whatever. But you did some traveling around Japan. How
Yes.
did it work out?
Well, it was fine. I was with someone who spoke Japanese, and I was learning it, so I could make some conversation, and I could read some of it. So I got along okay. As I said, this is a character, not me. It's not my experience.
Have you been back?
Yes.
You've changed a lot, or?
Yeah, you know, I went back in 2005, and I had left in 1990, May in 1990, and it was different. I remember the country being all, you know, perky and full of itself and positive. And in 2005, they were like, oh, you know, and there were weeds in the gardens, and never before did they have lawn grass or weeds in any of the gardens. So it looked a little dingy when I went back.
Are you considering writing a second novel, either to follow up that character or another kind of historical?
Well, yes, I'm considering a second novel, but more home-based.
Oh, socially in Japan,
What, John?
North Castle has a lot to work with.
Yeah, oh, okay, North Castle, yeah, exciting place. Yeah. Kent?
I'm thinking, got distracted about that, but yeah, there's probably a lot of stuff here you could.
Yeah, sure, Westchester. There's a lot to do here, and anyway, I have some ideas, so we'll see where that goes.
Oh, that's what I meant to ask you. Sociologically, when you went in '05 versus in 1990, was it much different sociologically?
I didn't get that deep. I mean, we traveled, we visited
See
some
much
friends. The
So-
kids in Harajuku were noisier and had more fantastic costumes. Harajuku is a park, and over the weekend, the young people, high school and college, get out and try to do hippie type stuff, what they think is like protest type stuff. But they're not protesting. Nobody really protests in Japan. What they do is dress in bizarre ways and,
Well,
you know.
like in art.
Well, it's not so much art as it is the kind of acting, sort of like an Amish kid, you know, smoking a cigarette. You know, he's doing something outrageous, but he goes back to the fold. That's Harajuku. So they have but it inspires fashion. So they get some of this Harajuku fashion, and there's even a doll or something Harajuku. But that's what it's about. It's the park where all these kids get out and get groovy or whatever, you know.
I have a weather-related question.
Weather-related, okay.
The Japan, I think it's called the Japan current,
Uh-huh.
goes up across Japan, down the coast of Alaska, and down to the west coast,
Mm-hmm.
similar to the Gulf Stream on our east coast.
Yeah.
Just the opposite. Does that seem to have an effect in Japan? Are people aware of you know, the cold and the warm temperatures? 'Cause I was in the Aleutian Islands for 2 years, when the Korean War started, but you really notice the weather. I mean, you can't get away from the weather in that, between the Bering Sea and the Pacific Ocean and that current, because it's warm and cold meeting each other. And I was wondering if that's the same in Japan.
Every day the weather forecast was tokidoki komori. It's a little bit cloudy.
Yeah.
The weather is, it's a little bit warmer than yesterday, but it not so much as what tomorrow. Could you give me a temperature? No, it's all relative. It's all relative to, if you remember what it was yesterday, it's like, well, not so much today, or something, you know. Tokidoki komori, yeah, always cloudy. We were in Tokyo, which is about the same as latitude as DC, and they're both kind of swamps in terms of weather. Horrible summers. The most that I think the Japanese are concerned about would be the earthquakes. I mean, I remember walking along the street once and everything was shaking. It was like, what's going on? We were in a building in Yokohama, and